Hello and welcome to CDAO Magazine interview series. I'm Asha Saxena, founder and CEO of Women Leaders in Data and AI. Today, I have a pleasure of talking to my dear friend, Besa Bauta, who is also a Chief Data and Analytics Officer for State of Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Besa, welcome. I am always excited about talking about generally AI and data with you. But I think the whole conversation around generative AI has been on top of everybody's mind. And I think the buzz really is so real because people can touch and feel AI like they've never done before. I would say ChatGPT really opened this whole new world for businesses and also for consumers and how they consume and interact with AI, not just like how we interacted with Siri in the past or Alexa or having Amazon doing recommendation engine, but now we actually can engage with ChatGPT, create content, images, you know, people are actually doing research on ChatGPT with citing sources from where this data is coming from. So it's really engaging with the consumer now that like never before. So as we start talking about the future of generative AI, let's talk a little bit about the current state of generative AI. So give us a little high-level overview, based from your point of view, of what generative AI is, how would you define it, and where do you see the current state is today?
So when I think of generative AI, I really think of different types of application that can source information at scale. You know what I mean about sourcing information? So the way a lot of these models are trained is that there's a lot of data that gets fed into the model, and then whatever the specific use or utility of that application, it's able to synthesize that information and actually come up with new creative content. So the field of AI has been around for many years. I know when I give lectures, they're like, oh my God, this is that old. I'm like, algorithms were developed since 1800 with Ada Lovelace. So this is nothing new. I think is the scale of these applications and the amount of information. And I think we reached a tipping point with big data. I think that kind of allowed us to train these models. And you'll hear a lot, the difference between machine learning and AI, but we're able to train these models and actually a lot of the researchers, I have colleagues of mine at NYU, like Likun and many others, who've actually taken similar to our brain pathways and mirrored, generative neural networks. So a lot of these new applications are based on pretty much old technology, but new ways of integrating not only information, but new ways of synthesizing information. I think that's where we are now, is the synthesis of this information. And I think you mentioned with ChatGPT is just before AI was in the background, a lot of the industries were using it. I think you mentioned Siri, you mentioned Alexa. So you thought of these big tech companies that had kind of like lock on AI. And I think with the OpenAI project, the whole point of that was to make it much more user friendly and then also allow the greater public having access to these tools and their ability to use these tools themselves. So in a way, we get to play with these applications before they were the purview of large scale, tech firms. They're kind of behind the locked gates. But now we get to, type in, our queries and get a response or interact with something that seems otherworldly in a lot of ways. It's a different types of intelligence. But I have to be very careful is that we're not, in a way, the application kind of mirrors and gives you sort of prompts as far as what's the next best answer. I think we haven't reached singularity, but we're reaching that pathway where we could see what the future potential might be in the next 10 or 20 years.
When you talk about the future, I want to touch upon, we always thought AI was for the big businesses. I would interact with a lot of CEOs who are mid-sized companies, and they would say, it's really big companies have complex data and they can play with it. We are a small company or a mid-sized company, and we really don't have that kind of manpower or technology to invest in AI. But I think in the current scenario, I see a lot more. I mean, if you go on Instagram or social media, I mean, it's flooded with ideas of how you can use ChatGPT and put API and build something on top of it. So it's really taking it to the mainstream from ad agency. I was talking to an agency owner and he said, I use Midjourney every day. So they have really incorporated these technologies, which was hard to access, into their life today in every day. Sometimes I feel that the large organizations are questioning ChatGPT and blocking it, whereas small businesses are jumping ahead in integrating these technologies much faster because they're agile. They can experiment and they have less to lose, because they're just starting out. So I think the whole startup world, probably the founders and the entrepreneurs probably will jump onto this whole generative AI faster than the big businesses. Or do you feel that the big businesses still have the lead in this evolution of AI?
I mean, if you think about even ChatGPT, it originally was developed with the OpenAI, the whole, having this sort of a communal sort of AI development platform. And then Microsoft kind of took it over. So now they're productionizing it. So I think some of the tech leaders, and then you have Google with BART. I think they were launched at the same time, but ChatGPT got much more buzz than it did Google's AI, Google's BART. And then Google had Lambda. I think, if you think about the original sort of large neural networks and large, language models. So Lambda is, one of the language models that Google had developed. So I think the large tech companies are further ahead. I mean, we see the Siris, we see the Alexas. So they've done quite a lot of work, and their research and development divisions are doing really interesting and novel type of work. I think when you're talking about a small and mid-level companies, now we have tools similar. When I think of ChatGPT, I think of my sort of navigation platform. Remember in the olden days, we had those boxes, and I was so excited. Instead of having a map, we had MapQuest. I remember the time of MapQuest,
Yes.
but my kids are like, "Oh my God, Mom, you're that old." Yes, I do remember. I actually even had a map. And then we went to those, a Navient dashboard kind of things that you plug into your, to your car. And the next thing you know, the cars end up having tablets and they have built-in navigation. Right. And now we're relying on that much more than in the past. I mean, it's sort of the same type of analogy in parallel, that there is this application that kind of uses large-scale geospatial data to help you navigate. And it's become so ingrained in our daily lives, we don't question it. And I think the same thing, sort of that type of development is going to happen with ChatGPT, is that in a way, these applications are easy to use for the masses. So, allowing you to just log on through a web portal and access this, generative AI model and type queries and get responses. I think it's made it very easy for the large consumer to be able to play with these applications. Similar, we're having geospatial or geoinformation systems. Before, they were the purview of NASA, they were the purview of the military, right? No one had access to GIS or geolocation applications. And now my nephew does. He could sit in his computer and kind of look at the globe and have all these satellites kind of pinpoint different locations that he wants to see. It's a learning tool, but it's also accessible. I think this whole aspect of accessibility, I think it's key. And same thing, I think you talked about Midjourney, and I'm thinking of Dolly, and I'm thinking of, my daughter's always on Discord playing with different types of, visual types of generative AI. And that's, again, is really easy for them to use because this web-based access and interface allows the masses to have access to these applications. Before, we didn't have the same type of access. I think that's the key component here. And with small and medium companies, I think that access allows them to experiment, very differently in a way. If you give a kid a toy, they do, or Legos, the imagination or application, I think it's unique. And we're going to see some really interesting things in the next 5 or 10 years.
So when you talk about the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of people are speculating that the advancement and the world will be changed much faster than we think. When we talk about what would it look like, how the AI is going to play a part in our lives, and people say that by the end of 2024, this would be a different world. The kind of advancements that we will see in technology is going to change how we operate. I mean, now, I mean, just thinking about, the copywriters are using ChatGPT to write their content, and it's become very common. And so we're changing already how we operate. Where do you see in next 2 to 5 years, where do you see our world going with the evolution of AI in businesses?
I mean, when I think of somebody asked me this a similar question in the past, like, is this another one where our world is going to completely change? And I think of like Web3 and sort of like the visual, sort of immersive experiences, that were touted, 5 or 10 years ago. It didn't go anywhere, or didn't get, the uptake wasn't the same way. And when I think of even the Industrial Revolution, I was looking at content. I'm working on a project. I'm looking at content, and some of the same things, were coming up. You could parallel everything that was said, during the Industrial Revolutions, when we went from steam engines to sort of locomotives to, further advancement. To currently with these types of, computer-based technologies. And then you could see an echoing of, oh my God, we're going to lose all our jobs. Yes, you're going to have some sort of job loss, but it's sort of a transformation. Many new opportunities get created, different ways of working, different ways of interacting. And another important thing I think you did mention is that, like with ChatGPT, copywriters are using that. So where do the guardrails need to be put? Or do we need to put guardrails? Or do we really need to reimagine how do we do copywriting? I mean, I think maybe that's sort of the next step, really reimagining how we do the work that we do today, and think of these as assistive tools to allow us to do our work better. I'm much more positive that way, rather than gloom and doom, like, oh my God, these, technologies are just going to take over our lives. I mean, in a way they have, but I see them more as tools and aids rather than anything else.
Thank you so much for being on the CDO Magazine interview. And hopefully we'll connect again and have another conversation. And for everyone who's listening, if you have any questions about WILDA, Women Leaders in Data and AI, please reach out to me or Besa. Besa has been a member for a while. And about CDO Magazine, please visit CDAO.tech for any additional interviews and tons of great content on the website. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Asha. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.